Right, it's time for the day's business news. Stephen Carroll joins me. We're starting with the defective airbag scandal in the US. Tell us more.
Yeah, that's right, Rochelle. It's now become the biggest automobile recall in US history. The Japanese company Takata has doubled the number of vehicles that it's recalling to 34 million in the United States. Globally, the number of cars affected by the defect is more than 53 million. At least 6 deaths have been linked to the issue, as Kate Moody now reports.
Nearly 34 million cars and trucks may be at risk of exploding airbags. That's the warning from Japanese manufacturer Takata, which has for the first time declared its airbags defective and doubled the number of vehicles already being recalled in the United States.
This recall involves roughly double the number of vehicles built in the United States every year. It's fair to say this is probably the most complex consumer safety recall in U.S. history.
Takata supplies airbags to many of the world's largest car makers, and models by 11 major brands are affected, notably Honda, General Motors, and Toyota. The first complaints against Takata were filed 15 years ago, but it had resisted blame. For months, U.S. safety regulators have been pressuring Takata to acknowledge the defects so the cars could be recalled and fixed. The root cause of the problem remains unclear, though it's thought the chemicals that inflate the airbags can explode with too much force, piercing the bag and sending metal fragments into the car, as one victim testified last November.
When the impact occurred, shrapnel from my car's airbag shot through the airbag cloth and embedded into my right eye and cheek.
The faulty inflators are linked to 6 deaths and 100 injuries worldwide. Drivers are being urged to check if their cars may be affected and take them in for repairs.
Well, Stephen, in Japan, there's been some good news for the economy.
That's right. New figures on growth have come in better than expected. The Japanese economy expanded by 0.6% in the first 3 months of the year. That's the second quarter of consecutive growth in the world's third largest economy after the country fell into recession last year. Earlier, we spoke to our correspondent Gavin Blair in Tokyo about whether this upturn was sustainable.
In some senses, this is just simply growth is a rebound from last year's mini recession that followed the sales tax hike. And what happened, a lot of people bought their big ticket items, their homes, cars, electronics, etc. in the month before the tax went up in April, and that led to a sharp drop afterwards. Now, the other big boost this last quarter has been from exports, where the weaker yen has made Japanese goods more competitive overseas and increased the value of earnings repatriated to Japan. And exports grew on an annualised basis of 10%. Whether or not it's sustainable really is the big question. I think the answer is short-term yes, long-term no. There will be some more growth throughout this year, but the elephant in the room for the Japanese economy is shrinking population. The workforce has been shrinking for decades, and now the overall population has started to fall. And as any economist will tell you, it's very hard to achieve sustainable growth with a shrinking and ageing population.
That's Gavin Blair in Tokyo. Let's see how the markets have reacted to that news. And we've seen the Nikkei in Japan trade up over 1% after that positive economic news, just slightly over the 1% mark, as you can see there. But shares in Takata, the maker of those faulty airbags we were just talking about, are down by more than 10% in Tokyo. Elsewhere, you can see gains there on the Shanghai Composite and on the Kospi in Seoul as well. We'll take a look now at some of the day's other business headlines. And the City Council in Los Angeles has passed an initial vote to raise the minimum wage there to $15 an hour. If the measure is approved by the rest of the council, LA will become the biggest US city to raise wages to that level. The current minimum wage in California is just $9 an hour. The French telecoms group Altus is in talks to buy the US cable operator Suddenlink. A deal would see the group, owned by the billionaire Patrick Drahi, enter the US cable market for the first time. The Reuters news agency also says that Altus has held talks with Time Warner, the number 2 in the US market, over a potential takeover. The Swiss bank UBS is to pay a total of $545 million to settle claims that it manipulated the foreign exchange market in the United States. The fine includes more than $340 million paid to federal authorities and another $200 million to cover breaking a previous deal that it struck with authorities there over rigging the interbank lending rate LIBOR.
All right, finally, for a list of the world's most purchased brands, and there's one familiar name, perhaps no surprises there.
Yes, exactly, and it's Coca-Cola that's topped this list. It's compiled every year by the research company Kantar World Panel. It's the third consecutive year that Coca-Cola has come out on top of the 11,000 brands surveyed in 35 countries. Now, the study measures how many households buy the products and how often. Let's take a look at how the rest of that top 5 shapes up, though. You can see it's followed by Colgate, the toothpaste maker, which is bought by more than half of the world's households. That's their claim to fame. Maggi, made by Nestle, Lifebuoy, a brand of soap, had dropped. Is the number 2 brand in Asia, and we've had Nescafe as well, coffee, which has dropped to 5th place. So some familiar names there for all of us.
I confess, Coca-Cola is bought in my household. All right, thanks very much for those business headlines there, Stephen.